Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It is definitely a week of a very steep learning curve, trying to work out how all this goes. So please be patient with us. I'd really like to say thank you to Norths and Andrew and Alby for joining us, because I think what we have planned over the next few weeks will actually keep us engaged at home and also help us be in a better position when we actually get out on the water. Now, for those of you that are new to Zoom webinars and meetings, what we've done with this webinar is we've actually muted all the attendees. And that's just because, you know, if we have had over 100 people register, and if everybody's trying to talk at the same time, it just becomes chaos. What we would like, however, as we go through the presentation, we'd really like your questions along the way. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, in the middle there, you'll see something that says chat. If you open that up, you'll be able to type in a question, and then Alby and I are monitoring the questions as they come through, and we'll be working out a good time to slot that question in. So our plan today is, you know, Alby's talk's going to take, Andrew's talk, you know, is about 20 minutes or so. And I suspect with questions and things, it might go on a little bit longer. So anyway, sit back, enjoy, and I'm going to hand over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Karen, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Welcome to the first Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron webinar in conjunction with North Sails. I'm Andrew Parks, and as Karen said, Alby Pratt's also joining us. Our subject today is mainsail trim. So we're going to start with some of the fundamentals. To all of those of you who are a bit more advanced, I apologise in advance, but we just want to get all the basics covered so that when we're using some terminology, everyone who's watching is across it and they can all benefit from it. And as an old friend of mine, my first boss, Mike Fletcher, told me, you always relearn something when you go sailing. So all of those who know about this, it's just another chance to reinforce what you already know. So as we discussed, there is a Zoom chat room. So if you've got any questions, feel free to ask. We'll do our best to answer them as we go. But if your question doesn't get answered at the time because we've moved on to the next subject, don't panic. We'll come back to you at the end of the presentation. So to help us today, we're using the North Sails Sailing Simulator. It's based on a J35, which should make you pretty happy, Malcolm. And all the numbers are derived from a VPP. So they're real numbers. So when we make a change, it's actually done on real data. So a couple of little things a few terms we're going to use today. The first will be lead ribbons. And if you look at the top of the mainsail, they're those two red ribbons that are flowing. Now, the aim is to have them flowing all the time. And they help us determine whether the sail is over-trimmed. If they're not flowing, the sail is stalled. The next thing you'll see is...
Huffy.
Yeah.
We haven't got the simulator up.
Oh, you're kidding. Hang on. Oh, I've had one here. Is that on my screen? Okay,
I've got the slides.
Okay. Hang on a sec. Is it up now?
No.
Oh, you're kidding me.
We have tested this, everybody.
Every time we test this,
a couple of times.
We were trying to be a little too fancy, so we had the North Sails symbol when you were all checking.
I'm just going to bear with me, people. So, share my screen.
Welcome to those that have just joined us. If you've got any questions as we're going along, please enter via the chat function down the bottom. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay, now we've mastered technology. Doesn't matter how much time you practice, it never seems to work on the day. Okay, so as we discussed, we've got our lead ribbons up at the top of the mainsail, and we're going to be using them quite a bit in our illustrations. You'll also see three stripes, white stripes on the sail. We call these draft stripes, and they help us determine the depth of the sail and where that depth is. So the first term we use is chord, and the chord length is from where the stripe touches the mast all the way to where it touches the leech. And so that we use that as the overall length, and then we use percentages of that. So when we look at the deepest part of the sail, we can see it's just around 40%. And so that is the draft position. And then the last thing we talk about is the camber. And the camber is the depth of the sail. So if we took a straight line from the luff to the leech and then measured down from that straight line to the point on the sail, that's a percentage as well. So we're using these as a guide to learn what each adjustment is and what it does to our sailing. So I just thought I'd cover that because we'll be referring to it throughout the course of the day. And if everyone in the room isn't across it, you know, some people may lose a little bit of the presentation. So basically, there are three sources of power from your sails: angle of attack, sail depth, and twist. Our total power in our sails is the sum of each source. So looking at our first thing, angle of attack. Angle of attack increases as we trim our sails on or we bear off. So in the animation, we can't go all the way up to head to wind. So we've got the boat sailing as high as it can at 35 degrees. As we bear off, we see the boat speed increase. And we're slowly getting faster and faster and faster. Now we're sort of at our optimum angle. But if we continue to bear away with the sail still trimmed on and don't readjust our trim, as we come away, we see the leech ribbon start to fall and the sail is stalled. So that means that we've actually got the sail trimmed too hard for the angle that we're sailing. It means that we need to adjust. So as we come back up closer to the breeze, the trim matches the angle and we're sailing properly again. The next thing that adjusts our power is depth. So the deeper we make the sail, the more powerful it is. And we're always searching to maximise our power to suit the conditions. So one way to increase power is to increase depth. So again, if we look at our leech ribbons at the top, as we ease the backstay, we can see if we look at the stripes, we can see the sail getting deeper and deeper until eventually the sail stalls. So if we go too far and we make the sail too deep, we can see all this depth up here. The sail is inefficient and it's completely stalled. The third power source is twist. I'm going to use a different angle to show you this. So basically, when we twist the sails, ease the sails off and increase the amount of twist, we reduce power. So if we ease the main sheet here, we can see the boat stand up as we reduce the power. And then as we turn the main sheet back on, the twist reduces, we're putting more power in the boat, and the boat heels over. So these are the three principles that we're always aiming for. We're trying to use the right angle of attack, the right amount of depth, and the right amount of twist to give us the maximum amount of power and be efficient. You know, you can't be efficient if the sails are too deep. There's just too much drag. So it's a compromise between angle, depth, twist, and keeping the right drag profile so that we're not too slow. So our first sail control is our main sheet, which we sort of covered in the twist thing. But as we can see here, as we've got a nice angle of heel there, as we ease the main sheet, boat stands up. As we trim the main sheet back on, we put more heel on. Now let's have a look at it from where you guys are on the boat. So as the main sheet comes on, we can see the top leech ribbons. If we trim too hard, and I'm sure you've all seen this, the sail stalls. So when your sail stalls, you ease at the main a little bit and get those leech ribbons flowing. Our next control is our traveller. We're going to take another view of this, and our traveller is used to, set the power for the conditions. In very light conditions, we might pull the traveller up to windward and give us more power because we're searching for it. But if it gets a bit windy, we might drop the traveller down a bit and keep it in that lower position, and then we use our main sheet to control our power from that point on. So set the traveller for the conditions, and then I like to use the main sheet It's a much more responsive way of trimming than doing it all with the traveller. Our next, and probably one of the more important tools that we have when we're sailing, is our backstay. And if we have a look from on board again, what the mainsail trimmer and the helmsman will be looking at. As we bring our backstay on, we bend the mast, and that makes the sail flatter. As we ease the backstay off, the mast gets straighter and the mainsail gets deeper. So this is a really good tool. I'm sure that you all adjust your backstays quite regularly when you're racing. It's a great tool to control your power for the conditions. And to give you a different view of this, we're going to look from the masthead. I don't think any of us have seen a sail from this angle before, personally. I've seen lots of photos. So if we look at our mast here, as the backstay comes on, the mast bends and the mainsail gets flatter. When we get some lighter air, we ease our backstay, mast gets straighter, and the mainsail gets deeper. So we just have to use the backstay to suit the power that we need. So again, it's all about controlling the power, having the right amount of power for the conditions. Our last, one of our last controls in the animations is our Cunningham eye. And what we do, the Cunningham eye helps us control where the draft is in the sail. So if we look at our sail here, nicely set up. And if you look in the second box down in the top left-hand corner, you'll see a bunch of numbers. I'm just going to change this. We're going to go to, okay, middle. If we look at the main middle, we have 39% draft. So the draft is 39% back along that chord length, as we discussed. And then from the straight line down to the sail, we're looking at a depth of 11.8%. And these are all relative to this overall length of the chord. So we always refer, our numbers are always based on the chord. So if we look at that number now, we've got our draft at 39%. Pretty nice, that's a pretty nice setup. But as we pull the Cunningham on, we do two things. We drag the draft forward in the sail, and that happens as the wind increases. The draft will naturally want to go aft, but we also flatten the sail. So if you look at the middle stripe on the animation, as we pull the Cunningham eye on, we can see the sail getting more draft forward. So the draft has now gone forward to 33%, almost, you know, quite close to the luff. But the other thing that's important is if you look at the stripe from about 40% aft, you can see how straight the exit is and how straight the leach is. So then if you keep watching that same stripe, as we ease the Cunningham off, the draft goes aft and the shape returns to a more even curve. A little bit more curvature in the leach, which is what we need when we're searching for power in lighter air. And as we tension the luff again, we can see the leach straightening out and being more efficient as the wind gets up. Okay, so that's, they're the animations that we can cover with our simulator, but there's still a couple of other controls that I can't show you on this. We don't have that tool available, but they're very important. The first is your outhaul, and it has a lot of, it controls the bottom third of your mainsail. So obviously we tighten the outhaul to flatten the mainsail when we have too much power, and then we ease the outhaul to make the mainsail deeper. And I'm sure all the helmsmen out there have been sailing along and the wind gets light. And when the breeze gets light, you lose the power in the boat and the helm on the boat. By easing the outhaul quickly, that rounds up the lower part of the mainsail, gives you more power in the foot. But the main thing is it actually gives you more return in the leach and more power in that bottom part of the sail. And that's what gives you helm, because when the helm comes off the boat starts to sag to leeward and you lose your height. So it's a really important adjustment, and it's one that good mainsail trimmers use all the time, particularly if the conditions are changing. The next control that we can't show you on this is the boom vang. And there's a little bit of a glitch with our notes, so I'm just going to talk you through this. The boom vang is used to control our twist when we go downwind, because obviously as we ease the main sheet, the boom wants to go up in the air. So we need to use our vang to control our downwind twist. And the best thing to do is use your leech ribbons as a guide, and also get underneath the boom and look up at the sail and eyeball the top batten and make sure that the last part of the top batten is no more closed than parallel with the boom. Same sort of things we're looking at when we go up. So, and then obviously if it's windy, you need someone to play the vang going downwind, because if you have too much power in the vang and you ease the main sheet and the vang's still on, the boat will broach. And I think most of us have been through that scenario. It's not great. It's not a lot of fun. So the other time we use the vang is for vang sheeting. And there are some boats that don't have a traveller, or there's some one designs where they prefer that method of sheeting the mainsail. In that situation, what we do is we use the vang to control the twist like we did with the main sheet in the earlier animation. And then we control the power with the main sheet. So instead of using your traveller, dropping your traveller a bit, you actually use the main sheet. And look, this works pretty well for smaller boats. It's not such a big deal on yachts. Generally, the vang system isn't strong enough, and it's, you put too much pre-bend in the bottom of the mast. But it does work on a lot of boats. So that sort of covered all our basics. And Alby, have we got any questions at this point?
We haven't, but I'll start a couple off. So if you could adjust one control, what's your first go-to control if you're sailing in Sydney Harbour and it's a very shifty day? Aside from the main sheet, what's your go-to? What should you go to first?
If it's shifty, backstay. The backstay has the most control. You can depower and power up really easily with it. And one thing that we didn't touch on, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it because we will discuss it when we talk about headsail trim, but the benefit of the backstay is as you pull it on and it bends the mast, it flattens the mainsail, but it also tightens the forestay, and it makes the jib or the headsail flatter. So you're getting two sails being affected by one adjustment. So it's that's probably my go-to. If I could only have one, it'd be the backstay.
Okay. And maybe touch on, very important with vang sheeting, to have someone assigned to the vang at all times.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So again, vang sheeting works really well, but we've all been in the situation where you're sailing upwind, you're on port, you might be looking around, and a guide leeward of you tacks on the starboard, and you've got to go behind him. You're the giveaway boat. Now, if you go to dip behind another boat and you're on port and you don't let the main sheet off, you won't be able to pull away, and there's a good chance you'll run into the other boat. The same applies with the vang. If you're vang sheeting and you don't have the vang ready to ease, you'll ease the main sheet to a point, but the vang will still be holding the leech down, and it will make you round up, and you'll probably have a collision. So if you do vang sheet, make sure you're attentive on the vang, because it's just like dumping the main when you're dumping another boat.
All right, so Andrew, what would you say is your power up and then depower cycle?
Okay, look, basically, I like to get everything pretty well set up for the day. So get your backstay right, get your outhaul right, set your Cunningham, and then I tend to use the main sheet. And if the boat's balanced and everything's going well, on a 40-foot yacht, if you dialed in, you should only be using an inch or two of main sheet in a gust. But if once you get to the point where you're starting to use too much main sheet, you need to more backstay, bend the mast a bit, flatten the main. If you're still struggling, drop an inch of traveller. But I like to keep the traveller pretty static, because if you go through a light patch, you don't just wind the main on. You've got to bring the traveller up as well. And a lot of boats, the traveller systems aren't perfect, and you lose time doing it. So if you can do it with the main sheet, that's my preferred way. But then obviously the backstay is my next go-to.
Okay, what about for boats? A lot of boats don't have the ability to adjust their Cunningham eye.
Yep.
So what's the difference between adjusting the Cunningham and using the main halyard?
Yeah, look, that's a good question, Alby, and it happens a lot. A lot of boats I go sailing on, people wind the halyard up, and to the conditions, to suit the upwind conditions. The problem with that, and if you don't have a Cunningham eye on your boat and you're racing, I would go down to Whitworth, spend a few dollars and make a basic handy billy purchase system that shackles onto your bottom of your gooseneck, and just have a purchase system. Most sails will have an eyelet or a piece of webbing on them to put a Cunningham on. But the reason you use a Cunningham rather than a halyard is if you wind the main halyard up to suit upwind, as soon as you go around the top mark and set your spinnaker, once the sail's up, the pit person then has to ease the main halyard because it's too tight for going downwind. So instead of concentrating on what you should be doing, which is trimming and looking at the wind, you're fiddling around with the main halyard. So most sails, if they're designed correctly, are designed to go to your black band if you have one, and have a little bit of excess luff length, so you have to use a Cunningham eye when you're going upwind. And then when you go around the top mark, you blow the Cunningham off, the luff tension goes off the sail gets deeper and more powerful, and it's less distractions for the rest of the crew.
Okay.
So Annabelle's asked us a question here. So when's the best time if you do need to make those vang and backstay adjustments? You know, when's the best time to be making those adjustments on your vang and your backstay? You know, if you're on a 40-footer, sorry, I only sail a 21-footer, but you know, they're much harder to adjust on a bigger boat. So do you need to be adjusting them as you're going through the tack, or you know, when you're sailing downwind when there's a load off it?
Yeah, look, things like the backstay, a lot of it depends on the system the boat has. On smaller boats, something like a Beneteau 36.7, like Jeff Davidson's boat, it has a purchase system, a cascading purchase system. So that's really quick and easy to adjust. So you pull on a handful of backstay and the backstays comes up quickly. Other boats have got a hydraulic ram, and if you've got a boat where that's all you've got an electric pump on the ram, that's quite quick, so you can trim on and ease quickly. But more often than not, the ram is just centered on the transom, and someone has to go back and pump it up. So it's not as easy on those boats. So you tend to try and get the settings pretty right, and then it's only if you go into a drastic change in wind strength, the mainsail trimmer might pop to the back of the boat and dump a little bit of backstay off. Cunningham's a little bit more of a static thing. Most of the yachts tend not to vang sheet, but main sheet is the big one. You can make a huge difference in the amount of power in the boat just by trimming the main on or giving it an ease.
Okay, got a question here from Leah. What order priority would you adjust controls as you come into the leeward mark? Good question. Something I struggle with a lot when I'm on the main sheet, trying to get everything done.
Yeah, especially when you're coming in quick. Look, I guess the priorities are the things that are hard to adjust once you've gone around the mark. So I think my priority if I'm trimming the main is I like to get the pit person, because generally they will do it, to preset the outhaul, and that's a really important one to have set for the upwind leg. If you go around the bottom mark with the outhaul off, you're slow as a wet weekend, and then you're getting someone off the rail to pull the outhaul on. You'll lose far less time doing the last minute and a half of a run or a reach with the outhaul on than you will if you go around without it on. So I get the pit person to do the outhaul and the Cunningham eye for me. Then I do the backstay, because you've got to have the backstay preset. So on most boats that we sail on, the mainsail trimmer has to do that. So I do the backstay next. Then I set my traveller for the position I want for upwind. And then the last one is the main sheet. And, the traveller position's a really important one, because if you're sailing in lighter wind and you've got your traveller to windward, and you come around the mark with the traveller, down a bit, you won't have the height. You won't be able to hold your lane coming around the mark with other boats around you or in front of you. So checklist-wise, outhaul Cunningham from the pit, backstay, traveller, main sheet. And if you're sailing on a boat that's got winches for the main sheet, try and talk the tactician or one of the spare crew members to wind on the leeward winch for you as well, and the main will come in twice as fast.
Okay. Telltales and leech ribbons on the mainsail. Useful?
Useful? Yep. Essential? Yes.
Yep.
And particularly the leech ribbons. They will tell you more about what's happening than anything else. And as we discussed earlier, if the sail stalls, there's no wind attached to the leeward side, and that's a killer. We need the air to flow around both sides of both sails. So those leech ribbons are a really good guide, and they are the go-to. Yeah, wool tufts are handy, but leech ribbons are probably the most critical thing. So if you don't have them, go down to Whitworth's. You can buy them in a packet, or take your sail to your sailmaker, or go and ask your sailmaker to give you some. But yeah, you should have a couple of them. I like to have, at least 3 or 4. But if you've only got one on each of your 2 top battens, that's fine too.
If you haven't got any leech ribbons on your main, just send myself or Andrew an email, and we'll get some out in the mail to you next week, and you could be able to just stick them on yourself next time you're out, whenever that may be.
Yep, exactly. Good point. Good point.
Okay, a question from Edward here. If you have your rig tension set up for, say, 20 knots, I assume this is a boat with the ability to adjust the rig, and the breeze drops, the backstay ease is insufficient to power up the main without compromising forestay. Any suggestion on powering up your main when rig is out of range? Common on a boat like a Sydney 38 or something that has a J70?
Yep.
Something that has an adjustable rig?
Yeah. So look, I guess you've got to just do what you can. That's one of the challenges of sailing. Being able to adjust your rig for the conditions means that you might be quicker than the other guys when you've got it right, but if you get it wrong, you pay for it pretty heavily. Look, you just got to try and get your rig pretty well right. One thing I would say, the most common thing I hear from people when I talk to them, I'll give a client a call on a Monday and say, how'd you go on the weekend? And they go, I didn't go that well. And you go, well, where did you have the rig at? Oh, I had it set for 16 knots. Well, how much wind did you have? Oh, 12 knots. Oh, well, why? Why didn't you set it for 12 knots? And I think, if anything, I would always err on the soft side, because you can always pull the backstay on. You can always flatten the sails to a certain extent, but it's very, very hard to put power in the sails, and nothing feels worse than a boat that's completely underpowered. But getting back to your question, Edward, I guess you need to soften your backstay as much as you can, ease your outhaul, make sure you've got no Cunningham on, bring your traveller up. We'll talk about it next week, but round up the foot of your headsail, make the jib as powerful as you can. Just do everything you can to add power. And unless you're on a J70, change the headsail going down the run. If you're on a Sydney 38 and you've got your rig boned, down the run, drop the jib, put it in the bag, go to a deeper jib. But if you don't have that option like a J70, all you can do is soften everything up as best you can, round the sails up, make them as powerful as possible. And get your crew a little bit to leeward to give the boat some heel, because heel will give you more helm than making the sails deep.
Okay, a question from John. How about masthead rig boats and backstay adjustment? I think that sort of may come into the range of like on a J35, which have got check stays to control the mast bend as well as the backstay.
Yep. Good question. So yeah, your backstay on a masthead rig boat, it does a couple of things. It helps bend the mast, and it also tightens the forestay. So a J35 is quite a versatile rig, because even though it's masthead, you do have runners or check stays, depends on what you want to call them. And the beauty of that is you can actually pull your backstay on really hard, bend the mast quite a lot, get the forestay very straight, and then you pull the check stay on to pull the mast back in a column to take the compression out, and that makes the forestay straighter and it makes the mainsail deeper. So those boats have got really, really good control. Where it becomes a bit harder is when you don't have that, you've just got a backstay. Then you've got to balance it up, because you can't just keep pulling the backstay, because the mast will collapse under compression, and the luff round in the mainsail will be overdone, and the sail will be too flat. So when I get up range, what I do is I bring the backstay on.
Can you show us again on the simulator, Andrew?
Yeah. We won't get the same scenario, but this will give you an idea. So as we look at this, I'm just going to change this slightly to the right setting. So as the backstay comes on, we can see the mast bending. We'll just look from the top. So that's max backstay. Then as we ease it, it gets deeper. But to sort of answer that question, what I like to do is I'll bring the backstay onto the point where you start to get some creases coming out of the luff. So I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, but generally in this sort of area here below the bottom stripe, you'll often get diagonal creases coming out of the luff and heading towards the clew. When you see that, it means that the mast is overbent for your luff round, and that's slow, because what it does is it actually dumps the leach out, particularly the lower leach, and that's what gives you your height. So if you're in marginal conditions, bring your backstay on. When you start to see that creasing, ease it off until the creasing disappears, and that's as flat as you can make your mainsail. Pulling it on anymore, all you're doing is losing height. So that's your general thing.
Okay, question from John. Give some tips on trimming from reading the leach telltales. Good question.
Yeah. Well, basically, John, what you want to do is what we tend to aim for is have the top leach ribbon stalled about 50% of the time. That's in flat water. You're trying to keep the boat going as high as you can. So if we have a quick look, we'll just change this. So as we pull our main sheet on, let's ease a bit of backstay off. Okay, so let's ease our main. So we're sailing along here. That's all looking pretty good. Let's just see how it looks from off the boat while we're in the coach boat. So you can see our leach ribbons are flying there quite nicely. What I look for is to trim the main on until that top leach ribbon is it just starts to suck behind the main. Okay, so see, it's just done that there. So in the real world, you'd sort of be at that point there. And we can't do it on the simulator, but on a real boat, what'll happen is if you get to this point here, and then you click on another clicker main sheet, the leach ribbon will start to flow, and then it'll stall, then it'll flow, then it'll stall. And so if it's flicking back and forth about 50-50, that's a pretty nice setup for sailing in smooth water and sailing the boat pretty high. But you don't want it to be stalled all the time. And be careful, if in doubt, just give it a little ease. But that's in optimum conditions, flat water. But if you're in bumpy water, you need to keep everything flowing, because you're moving the boat through a much wider steering groove. And if you're moving the bow through, say 5 degrees around the waves, and the mainsail's trimmed on too hard, the sail will stall too quickly. So, I mean, to give you an idea, let's go a little bit of main off, just one click. Okay. Now, if I say there's some waves coming, and I bear away, it's stalled straight away. I come back up, it steps. So that's, okay, let's just have a look at this, 41.1. That was 1 degree. I can't even steer a boat through 1 degree. But that's 1 degree variation in your angle of attack, and the sail is stalled. So that's why when it's bumpy, you need to keep the sails more twisted. You need to get your traveller up, ease the sheet a bit more. So let's look at a scenario from off the boat. So it was bumpy water. What I would tend to go for, rather than that pretty firm trim that we're looking at there, I'd actually bring the traveller up a little bit further to windward and ease a bit of main sheet. And that just keeps everything flowing. It's a more twisted trim, and that gives you a bit more groove to steer the boat through. But if you've got the mainsail trimmed really hard and you hit a ferry wake, or you just want to put the bow down and get through some waves, you're right on the verge of a stall, and that's sort of what we covered in our first point about angle of attack. You know, if you've got the sails trimmed so hard that any change of angle of attack makes it stall, then you're probably trimmed too hard for the conditions.
Right. Nice, Harvey. That seems to be it for the questions.
All right. Well, look, what we did have, and it's just sort of going over a few scenarios, and one that we often see when we're sailing is we're sailing at the Squatty. It's a Saturday, nor'east is filled in, and we want to come off the start line. I know we're on the wrong tack for sailing in this scenario, but I can't change the tack. But we want to sail off the start line and keep our position and not get squeezed off by a guy to leeward. We want to sail a bit higher and slower. So how do we do that? Well, you can't just pull the traveller up, because all you're doing is slowing the boat down and stalling the sails, which is what we were just talking about. So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of things you can do. So right now we're sailing at 41.7 degrees. That's our optimum. So we're going to sail the boat a little bit higher and a little bit slower. So we're going to bring our bow up a couple of degrees. Okay, so we're sailing about 2.5 degrees higher to keep that high mode. Now, because we want to go high and slow, or not high and slow, a bit higher and a bit slower, we need to flatten the mainsail. So we do that by bringing a Cunningham eye on and getting rid of some of that depth. We bring our traveller up. We pull a bit of backstay on to take a bit of depth out of the mainsail. And we just ease a little bit of main sheet. There we go. So now, if we look at our top targets in top left-hand corner, we're sailing at 100% VMG. Our target speed is 6.4. We're doing 6.4. We've only got 4.1 degrees of rudder angle, and we've got 3 degrees of leeway. So they're pretty close to what our optimum numbers are, except we're sailing 0.2 slower. So this mode is something you use for a short period of time. You don't want to sail like that all Saturday afternoon, because again, we're pretty firm trim. And if you get into some bumpy water, you don't have enough leeway to get through that chop. So if we look now, let's go back to, we'll hit the magic wand and it'll take us back to our optimum setup. And so there we are. We're 0.2 faster, still at 100, and very similar numbers with rudder and leeway. So I wouldn't recommend you do that all day, but once you clear Bradleys and you're sailing normally, go back to a slightly deeper setup. But you can't just bring the main sheet on. You've got to make the sails flatter if you want to sail higher. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. The other thing is, we're talking about adjusting the backstay, which is still one of our most critical elements. What we need to do though is, if we're sailing along and we've got our setup here, that's 16 knots. It's nice, nice conditions, and then everything's going pretty well. We all of a sudden the breeze drops, and we've all seen this before. Boat stands up, or the helm goes light. We're down to 12 knots of breeze. So what do? How do we add power to the boat? First thing we do is we bring our traveller up. So as we bring our traveller up, you see the heel coming back on. Now we ease the backstay. But if we ease the backstay and then look at our sail, what's happened to the leech ribbons? They're all stalled. because that's such a drastic change with the backstay has to be countered with an adjustment on the main sheet as well. So then what we do is we use our main sheet out until we're just, we're just flying again, and we're back. So I guess all I'm saying here, guys, is if you get a light patch, you can't just dump the backstay and say, well, I've done my job. I'm a good mainsail trimmer. You've got to look at what that impact has on the rest of the sail and the rest of the performance. And if I was in that scenario, the other thing I would be doing is easing the outhaul, because that gives you a good punch of power quite quickly. So look, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's just a reminder for the helmsmen and the trimmers out there that you need to, think about everything. For every action, there's a reaction. So don't just set and forget, but when you adjust something, just be mindful that those dynamic changes adjust the whole sail. Yeah. We get a couple more questions there, Alby?
No, I think that's about it. Everybody?
Yeah, I think we're actually getting to our time limit,
Yep.
Andrew. So
Good.
we might wrap it up there.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, Andrew and Alby, for putting this together and making it all possible. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will be back next week, same time, same place, and we're going to be talking about headsail trim. So I'll send you a reminder. And for those of you that might want to go back and double check some of the points, we will actually have a link we can post on the website to let you go listen to it all again. But thanks, everybody, and we look forward to catching up next week.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your time.